Okay, has everybody written down on this what they want to do? Yes? Yes. How come there's only 12? Okay. Then right after we finish with this one, we'll figure out how we're going to get that accomplished. One thing that we missed in the introduction is the guy with the big camera back there. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Michael Smith. I shoot public access shows. They end up in Access Sacramento, Access Washoe County, Access Carson City. It'll be in Dayton, Access Douglas County, and it'll be in South Lake Tahoe. And if you want to get a copy, maybe you could give it to your local public access. Maybe we could help promote this fine establishment. So anyways, welcome to the area. I'm from Tahoe.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is, like I said, get into the reader. We're going to talk about how wave is formed. Learn how to read clouds to identify structures of the wave. Learn how to safely fly in the wave environment. Learn how to avoid the dangers of flying in wave. And then, last but not least, actually how to get up in the wave and how to use the wave. So, how is wave formed? Well, if you think of, if we just had a constant wind that, with altitude blowing over a disturbance or a mountain, then, and it was stable air, you'd get some wave action to it that would slowly damp out, or quickly damp out, so it wouldn't create a wave. Now, imagine that you had wind blowing over this little ripple that this little fish caused in water. So as the wind blows over that ripple, it acts kind of like an airfoil. So that the wind has to speed up as it goes over it, goes around that curve, and it will lift that ripple up a little bit. It will amplify it. The stronger the wind is above the still water, the higher that wave gets lifted up. Okay. Now think about that same scenario, but in air. So instead of a huge difference in densities between water and air, you just have some air that's a little denser under some air that's not quite as dense. The air flowing over it, it gets a little bump in it for whatever reason. The air on top of it, going a little faster, amplifies that bump, amplifies it, amplifies it, amplifies it. So it gets bigger and bigger as you go up. Okay. So that's what we need for wave. We need stable air so that it doesn't go up and just keep going up like it's going to be doing today. Instead, we want stable air, and then we have to have an increasing velocity with altitude. And that will get the wave to amplify as it goes up and goes downstream. So those are the basic conditions. You need that amplification. Now, this is your typical wave textbook picture of a wave, where you have the wave, you have a rotor, and the rotor, basically, if you think of it from a fluid dynamics point of view, it's replacing the mountain. There has to be something there to hold that spot. And so the rotor is just a placeholder for the mountain that's not there. The overall flow is a circular pattern like that, but it's not nearly as neat as that diagram would lead you to believe. This is a mean flow pattern. This is just the only good photo I could find of a mean flow pattern that had vortex in it. So that's a rotor or vortex there behind this ball in the flow. And you can clearly see the circular pattern going there. That's because it's a long exposure shot of what's going on. The exact same setup, but with an instantaneous shot, so a very short shutter time, gives you this. Now you would not predict what we saw earlier from this. Totally different looking, but it's the same thing. So,
can you explain what's a serpentine?
This is just this is a ball on a stick with flow coming at it. It's in a wind tunnel. So it's just the flows, going around here, separating, and it has the mean flow pattern like this, but at any given time, it could be attached and going down, it could be detached, and it could just be, it's a mess. But it's a mess that has some overall pattern to it. So that's the rotor. So the real rotor looks more like this. It's a mess. There can be there's an overall pattern to it, but it's a mess. Okay, but for simplification, we're going to talk about it like this. Just keep in mind that rotor isn't nearly as pretty as I've drawn it there. Excuse me. Now, the way the wave sets up is different depending on how strong the wind is and how strong the stability is. So if you have light winds or high stability, the wavelength will decrease. So the high stability means as soon as that air goes down, it wants to come right back up. Or as soon as it goes up, it wants to come back down. It wants to return to where it was. So that means it's like a weight on a really stiff spring. Very stable, so it will just spring up and down really fast. If you imagine that spring moving along in its path, if it's moving along very slow, the wavelength would be very close together, very short. Where on the other hand, if you have marginally stable air, or you have really high winds, the wavelength tends to get longer. So that's, sometimes the wavelength will be such that the best lift is on the other side of Highway 395. Sometimes the best lift will be to the east of the airport. It just depends on these parameters. And if you kind of know what's going on, you'll have a better idea, especially on blue days, on where to look.
Do you use the formula 1/5 to 1/6 wind speed for the distance?
I've never heard that before. For the wavelength?
Yeah.
That's a new one to me. Where'd you get that?
Easy.
Okay. 1/5 to 1/6.
So 40 minutes, about 5 miles between.
Okay. No, I had not heard that.
Okay.
I'll have to. So the wave amplitude, we were talking about the wavelength. So the wave amplitude, which would be the strength of the lift, really depends on the strength of the wind gradient. So the stronger the wind gradient, the more more amplification you're going to have. If the wind gradient starts to drop off or becomes negative, so the wind speed decreases with altitude, then that's probably where the amplification is going to stop. And also, if you have, of course, high stability is going to tend to have less up and down motion. So you want to have some stability, but not too much.
So when I look at the weather report, how do I know when it's low and when it's high?
That's a good question, and we will talk about that I'm going to talk about soundings and how to get all that information. I have trouble breaking this up because I would love to talk about sounding trip. That's another hour and a half, and then pretty soon we don't get to do any flying. So, okay, now something that is kind of it hasn't been talked about a lot in wave flying is a hydraulic jump. This is a picture of water flowing over a shallow dam. The water is just a few inches thick as it goes over the dam and then flows downhill, accelerates as it goes downhill. And then at a certain point, it forms this jump. So it goes from high-speed flow, high-speed relatively laminar flow, to a low-speed turbulent flow. And it's called a hydraulic jump or hydraulic bore. And this is in water, of course, very dense. In air, that jump can be much higher, miles instead of inches. So this is basically what's happening. This would be in water. You get the flow accelerating down because it's denser than stuff around it. It's accelerating down. It gets to a certain velocity, and it makes this transition into the jump. I could talk another hour about why that happens, at what speeds, and the wave speeds, and all this stuff, but it happens. We'll leave it at that. The mean flow, again, this is a very turbulent area here, but the mean flow is that there's some up here, and then just comes this way. But in the next one, yeah. This is what would be what it looks like in air. So you have cold, dense air. This could be the cold air over the lake, or just the cold air that's formed in a valley overnight. Starts flowing over the mountain, and then you get this hydraulic jump. So the flow through this will be pretty much straight through it. No organized big rotor. The next one could have the big organized rotor. So there can be what feels like rotor, kind of, it's really rough, but it's not going to be nearly as organized as the second one. Now there's the mean flow patterns through those. And I guess I should put some arrows. That's all left to right. Now the hydraulic jump can form high up on the mountain, or it can form low down, like I showed at first, or it can even form out in the valley. So it can, depending on the stability, the wind speed, all this other stuff, you can get the hydraulic jump can form in different places. There's some great pictures of one forming in the Owens Valley online. They're kind of hard to interpret, so I didn't include them. But one thing you can tell from it is it's ugly. It's not something you'd want to be flying in.
Does that bubble of turbulent air formed from the jump enough of a bubble to cause acceleration of the air over top of it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, let's go back to the other one.
Kind of looks like it.
Yeah. Like on this one, you'll get the first smooth, this is a nice smooth flow up here. You'll get that first smooth bit of lift in front of the jump, and then maybe some stronger real wave behind it. But this definitely complicates the picture of, normally the drop off is what causes the wave to start. This messes up that flow a little bit. It can make it so that there is lift, and this is why I started doing research into this. Is a lot of times I was finding lift in front of the base of the mountain, and that shouldn't be there. Using my current models, that should not be there. So I had to play around and found some research on this. So like this kind of thing, where you'll get lift way up over the mountain. That when you get in there, you get closer and closer, and it's turbulent stuff going up, where you would think there'd be strong sink, and then a little higher, and all of a sudden you're in smooth lift. But often it doesn't go very high. You got to dump down to the second one to get that. Okay, so now point I want to make about that, the bore though, is that's not necessarily always associated with wave. You can have the hydraulic jump, the hydraulic bore there without having wave. So if you just have some wind, and I've seen this in the mornings here during the, in the evenings here during the summer, is we'll have a westerly wind, there'll be the cold air over the lake coming down the passes, and then there's just this band of turbulent lifts, at the base or to the west of the base of the mountains. It's just a line that, again, my first thought was it shouldn't be here. But
Is it? Go ahead.
Seems like it would be so. If you've got glass off in the valley, then you've got katabatic coming down the ridge, and you've got to have that mixing area.
We're gonna say it might be a line of convergence.
it's kind of like a convergence, yeah. It's a bit different, a little bit different physics. And it has more. It happens late in the evening after we start getting radiation cooling, so you get a lot. And I think it's. I mean, I've never seen it. I know what you're talking about with the glass off, but what we get here is much stronger than that because there's actually convective. There's a lot of turbulence in it. Usually, if you get a glass off from the flow down the sides of the hills after it starts to cool off, the entire valley lifts smoothly. Whereas this is a very distinct line of rough, but strong lift, relatively strong. Okay, so now we're going to go through some clouds, or formation of clouds. Now what I'm showing here is, on the left is the dew point and temperature spread. So just the difference, the distance between the blue line and the red line shows the difference between the temperature and the dew point. And we'll look at this more with the soundings to know how to get this information. But if there is a low temperature dew point spread, they're close together, then at that level you're going to start to get the lenticular clouds. So if you have this kind of thing, you get that kind of thing. So this is your textbook lenticular formation, easy to work. We know exactly where it is, what we like. If there's some moisture down low too, then you may get the rotor and the lenticular. If there's multiple areas where the dew point and the temperature come together, every time they come together, you're going to get the clouds. So you'll get in this case, you get a couple of stacked lines. I'm going to do a little bit of an aside here. If it was great wave outside, I would not do this one, but I will, since it's not. Why do we have layers of moist, dry, moist, dry, moist, dry, moist? A lot of times, wave is associated with frontal passage. So you have this area of low pressure and the air is going around it. So you can think of, warm air on one side, cold air on the other side, and now they're getting twisted around. And they're swirling around, the warm air always going on top of the cold air every time it goes around. So you've got that cool, dry air, warm, wet air, cool, dry air, and the more times it goes around the low, the more stacked landings you get. So it would make sense that the closer you are to the low, the more chance you're going to have of stacked landings. If it's just if it's not high winds associated with the low, but just with the jet stream, less chance of that. Okay, so if you have some moisture down low, like this, you'll often get some cumuliform clouds at the leading edge of the lenticular. Now this only happens down low because as you get higher and higher, the temperature cools off. The air can't hold enough moisture to really change the temperature, because the temperature changes when water condenses out of it based on how much water is in it. You can imagine, we'll talk about this again later, but if to turn water into water vapor, you've got to add heat to it. When that water vapor turns back into liquid water, it gives heat off. So that's what causes cumulus clouds. If there's just a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of water in there, then it can only give off a tiny little bit of heat and that doesn't really affect things. At higher altitudes where it's so cold that the air can't hold hardly any water, you're not going to get much cumuliform activity. But down low, you can definitely get a lot. And that can change the character of the cloud.
Will that change the structure of the lift much?
It can. It can make it. We were having this. Sorry. Last week. we were having these kind of conditions, and because of the extra lift from the cumuliform, the faces of the clouds were like this. Instead of being in a shallow landing like this, they were almost straight up. And we were having trouble staying below 18,000 and below 120 knots in an ASK. I flew down to Mono Lake, past Lee Vining in an ASK 21 last week. Cool. So.
And managed to get back.
Oh, and came back with we were trying to bleed altitude the whole time. We had to have the spoilers open a good chunk of the time. And I kept having to tell the student, 120, because for some reason, they didn't want to fly an ASK-21 at 120.
I think that
We're not feeling sorry for
wave camp.
Yeah.
Wave camp's gonna have to start being like Mavericks.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
You get
we'll put
called
out a
out.
notice. Yeah, okay, 5-day notice. That's my way. Not a bad idea. Considering the amount of planning that goes into this, I'm not sure it would happen, but. But that can make a big difference. It can make the lower level lift really strong, and of course, you can just work right at the face of that cloud.
Can those conditions appear quickly enough to catch you out? If you suddenly find that the cumuliform clouds are forming around you?
Yes. When you're in conditions like this with the low level moisture, that's when you have to worry about. And believe me, this entire flight, I was looking behind me.
Yeah.
To see if it was closing up. And then we got too far away to look. And then when we were coming back, I did have a moment where the ridges and therefore the clouds kind of did a turn. So from where I was, they looked like they merged. And I was got a little tense there for me. But yeah, these are the conditions you definitely need to watch out for. That low level moisture is much more likely to get you in trouble. Okay, so a lot of times you'll have, especially as the air comes up from the Bay Area and then climbs up the Sierras, you'll just have flat cloud decks to the west of here, and then you'll get the gap. And this is the conditions we had last week. We had the gaps, so everything on that side of the Sierras was white. We had a gap, and then those kind of clouds. And that, again, this is where it's really starting to, you need to know what's coming.
And can they join together in certain conditions?
Yes. And so this is where, this is where knowing what the soundings are going to be doing throughout the day, knowing what the atmosphere, the temperature, and the dew point spread is going to be doing throughout the day is really, really important. The day that I did that flight down there, I had looked at the forecast sounding throughout the day, and it was supposed to actually dry out a little bit. So I was confident doing that until I turned around and thought I saw it closed up. But I wouldn't have done that flight and got that far away from the airport had I thought that there was moisture, had there been a prediction of moisture coming in. So that's where knowing what's coming is really important. Because this happens all the time. Okay, now if we have that hydraulic jump going on, a lot of times if there's some low level moisture, we'll get these really ragged clouds that don't really look like that. They're just wispy, torn apart. It's kind of like trying to draw white water. It's a concept. You can't really get it on paper. But so those are just shredded clouds. They can be at different altitudes because you're mixing some air that was in the valley that might be wetter with the cooler, drier air that's dropping over. So it could be a mixture of stuff. So sometimes there'll be a lot of different cloud bases depending on what exact moisture content that parcel of air had. Very hard to read, especially if you don't know what a hydraulic jump is, which is what I've been, for the last couple of years, I've been Okay, so this is more typical. This is a mess. So this is a little bit of everything. This is the kind of day that, you just have to try to figure out what's going on. And of course, we're looking at a nice, simple cross view. If you look at this from the ground, all this stuff overlaid on top of each other, and it looks much more like a mess. But if you have the concept of this stuff could be going on, it's easier to pick out of that mess. So a lot of times when I'm asked what's causing that cloud, I make something up based on what I'm seeing. Okay, now let's look at some clouds. So this is your classic lenticular, like I showed in that first diagram of clouds. So there's a layer of moisture down low, beautiful wave clouds. You know exactly where the lift is. Here we have, I like this one because you can really see the cumuliform clouds down here. They're not smooth ones like you get up high. There's definitely some convective stuff going on down here. Why is this little guy out here? That always bothered me. Now I think I know what he is. I think that's a little bump from the hydraulic jump there. Same with these little guys down here. Because that just classic wave that shouldn't be there.
Yeah. So, and that's just pretty specific to Mendon, right? Because of the lake.
No. Anytime you have stable flow, which is what you typically have for wave, down in Owens Valley, that's where a lot of the research was done on this. There's a guy down in San Diego he's the only guy who's bothered to do research on this. He's also a glider pilot, go figure. And I talked to him a little bit about this, but yeah, so there are other places that it happens. I think the fact that it happens here during the summer, when there is mostly unstable air, but the cold air from the lake, I think that's probably unique to here. Let's see.
Do you mind telling me just a touch more about the cumulus down there? Is that what you were saying earlier, that that's the cumulus that gets set off by latent heat release?
Yes.
As the
Yeah, so that's one of those that you only see down low when there's enough moisture to give off enough heat to affect the flow.
You illustrated, but you didn't speak specifically to wind direction in terms of how much it can vary in terms of perpendicular to.
I love it when a question goes to the next slide. So here is where the wind is not perpendicular to the mountain, it's coming at an angle. And so this rotor is actually going this way. And you can have about 30, 40 degree off and still have a good wave. So that's what this day was. And it was a very isolated wave. There were some good places and then there'd be bad and then good. So this was a marginal day as far as the strength of the lift, but really cool clouds. So you can see, a really nice vortex there. The humidity was just coming and going, just enough to get a lenticular, and then it would just dissolve, so you really see the structure.
Oh, so that sheath is not, it's not added on. The only things added on are the arrows.
Yeah.
And the sheath is a little lenticular sitting above the rotor.
Yeah, it's a transparent lenticular. It would go from being opaque where you couldn't see through it, and then it would fade and you could see the rotor. It was really cool.
We did that. So how high were you?
Below 18, but probably not much.
Yeah.
I guess it was a wave camp 2 years ago.
They only got 18.
Oh no, this was just because of where we were at. We were coming down. No, that was, yeah.
So the rotor is essentially like an auger or
It's a vortex.
vortex,
Yeah.
moving sideways, not just rolling.
Well, because the wind's at an
Yeah,
angle,
particularly.
it's moving sideways. If the wind was perpendicular to the mountain, then it would be a nice steady, but it's almost never exactly perpendicular. There's always going to be some.
But you also, the base of the ridge changes as well, right?
Right. So that can change, really complicates. That's one thing, you look at these nice two-dimensional drawings of a mountain, and then you go to the 3D, you look at the sky sometime, it's so complicated. Like, go, if you want to really get an appreciation for this, where you can really see it, go to a river. It's relatively shallow, that has rocks in it that are below the surface, and just watch all the movement, because that's very similar to wave flow. It's incredibly complicated. And to say, oh, there's lift here because of that rock is pretty difficult. But if you can kind of piece it together, but it's when you get into the 3 dimensions instead of just the 2, it definitely gets more complicated. Okay, this is one of my favorite pictures. This is that same day, later in the evening. Now, again, this is a photo that I could not explain a couple years ago. Because why is it, the wind's flowing left to right. Now, if it was flowing right to left, I would have a little bit better idea, but it wasn't. So I think that's probably hydraulic jump stuff going on the left side, and then the more wave-like stuff on the back side.
Where are the mountains in relationship to this? Which way are we facing? Okay, so
Yeah.
west is left.
Yes.
Is that a lens that came out underneath that raggedy bit, the sort of bright raggedy bit?
This here?
No.
Oh, this?
That.
Yeah, that's back behind. So that was behind this. There's this closest to here. That was
But they're like stacked in this picture here, from front to back.
yeah. Again, when you look at it in 3 dimensions, it tends to look like a mess. But this part there was lift out here. And if you look at a mean flow here, well, it's kind of like a lenticular, kind of like a lens shape there. But this part was definitely not laminar smooth flow. Here, classic picture of, stacked lenticulars.
Russell, point to where you would park your glider when you see something like that to go up. Right there.
Oh, and it goes forward as you go up.
Yeah, tends to go forward. Yeah, and we'll talk about that more here in a second.
That's a lenticular way up? Yes, sir.
Yeah, and that, my guess, I don't know, but I would have to guess that these are probably 10, 15 to 20, and this is probably up in the 30 to 35,000 range. But then here we have a nice top view. So you can see a really nice foam gap here. It's where the air is flowing down, so therefore it's warming up and all the moisture's evaporating. Here you can see there's a band of more moisture, and the foam gap here is closed up. So you would not want to be down here. Again, it's good to know what's coming your way when you're going out to fly.
What are the borders or whatever, the boundary lines, counties or?
Oh, yeah, those are counties. And there's Lake Tahoe right there. This is the Carson Valley.
And so, would you be on the eastern or the western side of that foam gap looking for the best lift?
I'd be right about there.
Right along the front of the lenticular.
Well, this mountain right here is what's causing it. There's the peak of the cloud. So what I would want to be is about a quarter wavelength in front of that. And I'll demonstrate that later. Okay. I need a right here. The dangers of flying in wave. Wave is extreme, there's no doubt about it. We have really strong winds and turbulence, and we have the dangers of flying at high altitude. So those are really the 2 categories of dangers. So I'm going to go through all of those. So first of all, on the ground here, watch the difference between these 2 slides. So there we have the rotor, so that the windsock is actually blowing from the east. And then it shifts a little bit, and it goes to the west, just by shifting that wavelength a little bit. And I've been doing patterns with a student where it's practically dead calm slightly from the east, and then by the time we land, it's 20 knots from the northwest. Just going up to 1,000 feet coming back. So you take off one direction, get off the toes, like, whoa, we're going to come back the other direction. So that's something that's very, you got to be very aware of. That you just don't trust the wind is going to stay steady for any amount of time. Before you take off, because of the severe turbulence, pretty much you prepare like you're going to go do aerobatics, because you may. So secure all the loose objects. If you're carrying a GPS, make sure it's a handheld GPS or a camera or your phone or whatever. Just make sure everything's tied down in a pocket, Velcro or something. Make sure your belts are very tight, especially if you're tall and your head's near the canopy. You don't want to hit the canopy and break it, especially if it's airborne. This is the control check. This is something that happened to me. I got in the glider, I have my super thick coat and everything on, and I get to my checklist where it says check the controls, and I do the stick, and I can't open the, my jacket was caught in the canopy, and I couldn't open the spoilers. So, good reason to do your control checks and your checklists. Verify that the oxygen is on and the regulator's working. One of the things about the mountain high systems is they are so efficient that they'll run, you can take 10 or 12 or 15 breaths off of it at the highest setting, and it'll go just from pressure in the line, even if the bottle's turned off. So you want to do that. You want to turn it on to the RM setting, the highest setting, breathe from it several times and make sure it keeps working so that it's on. Don't just take one hit off of it, oh yeah, it worked, and then turn it back off until you get to 18,000, until you get to 13,000 feet and turn it back on. And realize that you got 5 breaths out of it before you have to reach back there and get the bottle turned on. In high winds, above about 15 knots of wind down the runway, you're not going to want to turn around and do a downwind landing if the rope were to break, between 200 and 400 feet. Because that much wind would make the downwind landing very difficult, possibly dangerous. So depending on what your limits are, I tell my students 15, and myself I'd probably do about 20. But you got to think that maybe your emergency plan is going to be different based on the strong winds and the winds exactly when you are taking off, not the ones 2 minutes before you take off, because they can change. During your takeoff, be ready for gusts, changes in wind direction, strong crosswinds popping up. And if things aren't going the way you like, that's what the yellow handle's for. If you release too early, you probably could have pulled it out, but you're not sure, and you release too early, guess what? You get to try again. If you release too late, you don't get to try again. If you damage something, go off the side of the runway, dent the wings, break some fiberglass, then you're not going to try again. So you can always hook up and try again as long as you don't break something. That being said, don't have your hand on the release, especially for the first few hundred feet, because I've had this happen before to one of my students. They hit some turbulence and they were holding on to the release, and they released. Luckily, it was a couple thousand feet, but the turbulence can do that. Same thing, don't have your hand on the air brakes. Just have it on your knee, close to both of those things. Maybe even touching with the fingertips, so you know where it is, but don't grab hold of it, because the turbulence can cause you to open that control. Okay. Again, all takeoffs are optional. So, you don't have to do the finish, you don't even have to, even if you start the takeoff, you don't have to finish it. But once you're up there, you're gonna have to land. So if you're nervous about the conditions you're taking off in, then you probably shouldn't take off, because the conditions you may have to land in after a long, cold, hypoxic flight, the landing conditions may be beyond your abilities. So use good judgment, which will be another scenario. Okay. When you're on tow, if you get an attitude error, say a wing gets lifted, you need to be really aggressive at fixing that. Aggressive attitude aggressive. Okay? If you get a position error, say you get a little too high or a little out to the side, you can be patient fixing the position errors. You don't want, if you get too high, you don't want to dive right back in because you'll get some slack. So instead, fix those errors slowly. But if you do get a wing lifted or you get the nose pitched up or down, you gotta try to hold a constant attitude and then slowly fix the position errors. Being too aggressive at trying to get back in position will just cause more problems. If you get too high on tow, like I say, don't. If you're high on tow and the rope's still tight, then you can put it into a slip to help come back down a little quicker without the slack forming. You can open the air brakes a little bit if it's really bad. But if there's already slack in the line, then just let the tow plane pull away. Try not to change your position with respect to the tow plane. Let him pull away and dive a little bit at the very end. The one thing you don't want to do not get below the tow plane. So usually that's not a problem unless you try to get back in position too quick and overshoot. Because usually if you're getting lift, if you get, both of you get slammed up by some strong lift, the tow plane is going to get lifted less than the glider because the glider's wing loading is lower. So typically we're going to get too high rather than too low. If you do get knocked down, again, just let him pull the slack out. If you pitch up to try to get right back in position, you're just going to pop the rope. And I've done that one before. Sometimes release. Just don't be shy. Don't think that I can hang on. Egos bring down more gliders than anything else. So just if it's not going the way you want, both you and the tow pilot will probably be happier not being connected. Okay, now we're going to talk about some high wind stuff at altitude once you're up there safely and flying. So what I've done here is I've drawn 3 different air speeds. So, and you can see that's just the shape of the polar of the glider. So, low airspeed, the glider would fly along the red line, the blue would fly along, at a medium speed would fly along that, and the green would fly along that. So, and then you see the dotted lines there. So the solid lines are the actual airspeed and path through the air. The dotted lines are the path above the ground, so in space. So if I'm, in this particular one, if I'm flying at the blue speed, then the glider is going up and forward a little bit, so it's climbing. If I slow down to, let's call this minimum sink, I'm climbing really good. I'm also going backwards because of the wind. And if I speed up to the green, I'm going down and forward. Okay. So depending on what speed I'm going, depends on what direction up and down I'm going, back and forward. Because a lot of the times the speeds we're flying are, right around the airspeed that we're flying, the air we're flying through, they're basically stopped. And small changes in airspeed make big changes in forward and back motion.
Is the lunar surface there representing the wave, or?
This is a lenticular cloud.
Oh, okay.
Because this is going to get into a bad situation shortly. Because this pilot flew the red speed. So he ended up there. Okay, now he's at a point where if he flies the blue speed, he's stationary. Flies the red speed, he's going back over the top. Flies the green speed, he's going through the cloud. Okay? So he messed up. He, in a position now where there is no way out, except for to go over the back, which is not always the best thing.
But couldn't that involve going through cloud as well?
It could, yeah. Or it could be like this, where there's a cap, where that cloud is below the top of the cloud is above 18 or 20 or 28, whichever airspace you're flying in. So at that point, you're kind of stuck. You can't go faster because you're approaching VNE. You can't climb because you're going to be in airspace that you're not supposed to be in. You can't slow down or use the spoilers to descend because you'll be in the cloud. So you're kind of in that, you're kind of getting squeezed in that corner. So we basically got three choices here. Blast through VNE, fly through the cloud, break the airspace. Which
Bail
one?
out.
Huh?
Bail out.
So we go number 3.
Number 3 is with the break the airspace, hopefully is what everybody's choosing there. That's the one that won't kill you. So you go past VNE, you flutter the glider, you lose control surfaces, that's really not good. You get in the cloud, you can't see what's horizontal, you get into a spiral, you get past VNE or overload the glider, not good. You get into Class A or get above 28,000, get out of the wave window, you may get slapped on the hand, but you'll come out of it alive. And that should be the main concern.
And if you did that, would the prudent thing be to call control? And
Exactly. The first thing, if you're getting in this situation, as soon as you can, obviously fly the glider first and deal with the situation. But as soon as you can, get hold of Oakland 122. Hold that card out of your pocket and call them and say, unable to maintain altitude below this, I'm going to have to climb in because of the cloud, and let them know. And
you wouldn't declare an emergency, though.
Huh?
You wouldn't declare an emergency.
You could.
I mean, it really is an emergency. I mean, I wouldn't use those words unless they required me to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would just say that you can't maintain, because anytime it's not really an emergency. You can't. I mean, basically, you've been given directions. You've been told to stay below this altitude. You can't do it. You can't comply. So you just let them know. That's always within your.
Does your transponder have altitude indicators?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they do.
Oh yeah, so they'll know. Now, on this flight that I keep telling you about down to Lee Bunyan, this happened, and I was with a student. I was telling him speed up, speed up, speed up, and we were in just ridiculous lift. We were approaching red line, and we were approaching 18. And so we had no choice but to go in above 18. Now, because we were going 120 knots, you don't want to open the air brakes at 120 knots. So we were out in front of the clouds, so opening the air brakes was an option. But you don't want to open them that fast. So the safest thing that I thought to do was to make sure there's no jets coming. Slow it way down so I could open the air brakes. So we popped up, we were just bumping 18, we went up to 19. And I went like vertical, almost. And then popped the air brakes and then vertical back down. And so we got below 18. We were probably above 18 for like 30 seconds. But, so you just got to figure what's the safest way to get out of that situation. Making sure there's no traffic around, braking the Class A much better than going past VD.
There was a technique that pilots used to use back in probably the teens and 20s, maybe the 30s, before gyro instruments, when they were flying biplanes to get down through an overcast if they got stuck on top.
Like a benign spiral? Or?
The spin.
Oh, a spin, yeah.
Spin, because low energy, predictable, just hold the controls in particular spots and wait.
Yeah.
And pop up.
Yeah, if you have a glider, if you have an aircraft that will spin, that's great. ASK-21, you'll be in a spiral dive.
Not with you in the front of it.
Yeah.
It's 21.
But you mentioned benign spiral too. That's something I've heard about as well, but don't really know.
A benign spiral is when you trim the glider all the way back, open the air brakes, and let go of the stick. And some gliders will just kind of do this little thing where they'll turn, but they won't go into a spiral dive. Some gliders will deviate and go into a spiral dive. So you've got to know your glider, and it's something that you should try. If you're going to ever think you might use that, try it in your glider before you need it. We don't actually teach that. It's something that while you're up with instructors today or tomorrow or this week, you can, if you want to try it, do it. But the key thing though is you can't touch the stick. You've got to let go and let it just kind of do its thing. Because once you start controlling it, and if you're in the clouds, you're going to get into a little bank angle and then not know which way to go to straighten it out, maybe go the wrong way and get into the spiral. Okay. We don't get up quite this high. That's the earth. But when you are up at 28,000 feet, it takes a while to get down, with no lift. But if you're having to fight lift to get down, it can be even worse. So, if sun sets at 7:30, you don't want to start your descent at 7 and then arrive back 10 minutes after sunset. We need to be down on the ground by sunset. So keep that in mind. Okay, this is one of those unique things about wave, is that no matter what direction you approach from, you can have a headwind and sink. So it's just everything wrong. So if the rotor's set up in the right place, then if you're approaching from, let's call this the east, you're fighting a headwind just from the wave, and that can be very strong. The rotor here, you can be fighting a headwind when you're coming from the west. If you come in from overhead, you're going to have a lot of sink. So you just can't win. So the idea is that, if your glide computer says, oh, you've got it with 500 feet to spare, you just don't trust that. You got to get back when you're doing a wave flight. Try to let down, get back early, let down over the airport. Don't expect that you're going to be able to, you may be coming in here where the glide computer says, oh, you got a great tailwind. You're going to get there with tons of altitude. And then as you get lower, oh, you got a great headwind. You're not going to make it. So, most of the glide slope management stuff is pretty useless in a wave. You've just got to fly at what you know is there. Okay, if we're landing 1-6, kind of what I was talking about earlier in the SOP talk, was that you don't want to use your aim point right here because you'll stop right here. You want to try to touch down somewhere near this taxiway, proposed taxiway. So you probably won't even go to the end of the runway before you turn base. When you turn base here, obviously you're going to be in a crab angle. If you do a 90-degree turn to base, then you're going to end up passing the runway if you have strong winds. And typically we only land on 1/6 if it's pretty strong winds.
What's the difference between the black trace and the white one?
Oh, the black is I'm trying to make the shadow.
Okay.
I'm not much of an artist. Cool. More of a technical drawer than an artist. So these three-dimensional things really challenge me. So now we're coming into land. It's not unusual to be too low on final after all this, and there can be different causes. If the headwind is stronger than you expect, then you're not penetrating, so you need to, the best thing to do is to speed up to get, it does two things for you. It helps you penetrate the wind better, and you'll be down into ground effect, which where the wind is a little bit lighter. So that'll help you get out of that strong wind. If you hit some strong sink, then obviously you want to get out of that sink, so you need to speed up. If you just misjudged and you just came in too low, so there's not any particular bad headwind or bad sink, it's just you're in the wrong spot. Well, speed up still. Pretty much the remedy to all these is to speed up. If you're just too low, if you speed up, get down to ground effect again, you're going to get out of any headwind there is. The wind will be less close to the ground. The ground effect will help increase your performance, and you can keep flying along in ground effect until you either get to the runway or run out of energy, but you're close to the ground. Much better than running out of energy trying to stretch it by slowly pulling back on the stick at altitude. When you touch down at 35 knots in a 35 knot headwind, you are not moving. Your brain has been trained to say, I should be moving when I'm flying. And so most people, when they fly in high winds, try to touch down way too early. So if you touch down too early, especially in the 21s, or anything that has a nose quill on it, if that nose quill hits first, or even the main quill hits and the nose quill falls down, changes the angle of attack again, goes high, whoop, right back in the air, and you've already said, no, I've landed. Time to go back down. And it'll just happen over and over. And I've seen more PIOs, pilot-induced oscillations during strong winds, and wave conditions than any other time. So you just gotta, and I just explained this to somebody a couple of weeks ago. We went out and PIO. But we had strong winds right down the runway. He hadn't flown before, and it's expected. So keep that in mind. Don't worry about how slowly the ground is going by, or even if it's going forward. Get it close to the ground, hold it off, and keep holding it off until the tail wheel hits. Then you'll be on the ground safely, and you're not going to get back